All right, so last class we went over this sort of, we went over Lombroso, the atavistic criminal, in terms of, even though it's asinine today or invalid today, it still shows us that we have a history in criminology of still using some sort of profiles of people. Now, the next one that we're going to look at, you'll notice on the previous slide that there are two people that I mentioned, not just Cesar Lombroso, but also William Sheldon. And if you remember at the end of last class, I introduced you to something called criminal anthropology. Did you get that down? In terms of what criminal anthropology means? What does that mean? Exactly. The scientific study of, you're on the right track, keep going. But yeah, you're talking about looking at the body parts and those sorts of things. It's like the human physical traits connected to personality, right? There you go. Okay. So looking at the relationship, the scientific study of the relationship between human physical characteristics and criminality. So you have to keep in mind that even though this was, today to us this sounds pretty ridiculous, this was good science in the 1800s. So this is the definition of criminal anthropology. So what Sheldon did is he came up with something known as somatotyping or body types. Basically, the idea that you could tell what somebody was like or predict their involvement in criminal activity simply by their body shape and their body size. Does that sound like it makes sense today?
No.
No. But it was sound science at the time. Again, just to kind of recap from last class, Lombroso, he was that first person to use the scientific method to study criminality. My criminology people, how many of you have had criminology already? This should be a refresher for you, sound familiar. Okay, so even though it's not good science to us today, it was good science back then. We have to start somewhere, right? So here comes William Sheldon after Cesar Lombroso. And then you can see up there he's got different typologies of people. Okay, the first one is the ectomorph. My criminology people, do you remember what the ectomorph is?
Aren't they, the ectomorphs, the tall ones, ain't they more,
tall?
they're,
What does that T stand for? What trick did I give
they
you?
keep to themselves, or kind of shy?
In terms of their personality, yes. Yeah, because he used the physical characteristics to relate them to their personality. So the ectomorph, is someone who, yeah, you said tall, but look at the ectomorph. They're thin. They're kind of thin and frail. And so the idea was if they're thin and frail, what would their personality be like?
Kind of reserved and quiet.
Reserved, quiet, things like that. But I'll just go ahead and tell you right now, what's the problem with using body type, body size to predict someone's personality or likelihood of engaging in criminality? Body types can change. Can you lose weight?
Yes.
College people, can you gain weight? Yes. Freshman 15, freshman 30, whatever. Or maybe you're on the other side, you're too poor to eat. And so, yeah, body types can change. What about your personality? Does your personality really change?
A tiny bit, maybe.
Perhaps. But the research that we know in psychology suggests that by age, where are my psychology folks? I know I got one. By about age, even younger than that, who said age 7? By about age 7, our personalities are pretty much set in stone. We can change a little bit. But think about your personality type right now. And these are your classic typologies. Nobody fits really nicely neatly into those types, like extrovert, introvert, okay, or whatever. How many of you consider yourselves introverts? They don't want to raise their hand, right? Because they're introverts. So if I ask you tomorrow to be an extrovert for the rest of your life, could you do it? Where are my extroverts in the room? Okay? If I ask you to be an introvert tomorrow in the rest of your life, could you do it? Probably not. And that's the thing, is that our personality is kind of set in stone. But again, we're looking at history, historical science, and that's what he believed that he could predict. So that's a huge flaw in this logic. Okay? And the endomorph. You see the endomorph right here. What does the endomorph look like compared to the ectomorph? She says chunky, her words, not mine. Okay? And so, what kind of personality do you think he predicted that they would have?
More outgoing,
More outgoing,
outspoken.
outspoken. Very good. And the idea is that they're compensating for something that society sees as, what's the word I'm looking for? That society devalues to a certain extent. Okay. But again, that idea that body type and personality are somehow linked. All right. Then you got the mesomorph. Y'all remember what the mesomorph is? First of all, before the personality type, what's the body type? Athletic, muscular, and then connecting at the personality type. Ruby, you said?
Oh, it was her.
Oh, it's aggressive. Aggressive, very good. More aggressive. And so out of these three types, which one did he predict would have the higher levels of criminality?
Mesomorph.
The mesomorph. And why do we come to that conclusion? We assume, notice the word assume, we assume that criminals are more aggressive and that in order to commit certain types of crimes you need to be stronger, But let me tell you, does your body type and size and strength really matter if you've got a gun in your hand?
Yeah.
No. Okay, so again, the point is this is a type of profiling that, that we use. The science today is invalid, but this is a starting point. Okay? Then, of course, you don't see a picture up there, but then there's the balanced person. The balanced person means just like it sounds, balanced. They're not too thin, they're not too heavy, they're not too muscular, they're just kind of, they're average. Okay, so therefore they have an average personality, so to speak. But again, the biggest flaw of that is that body type cannot predict personality because your body type can change. Very good. Okay. All right, so moving forward in history, in terms of eventually getting to where we are today, we've got a long history to get through. I'm trying to get through this very quickly. So, we got Jack the Ripper. I'm guessing most of you have heard of Jack the Ripper. How many of you have not heard of Jack the Ripper? Or Jackie the Ripper? Who knows? How do you know it was Jack the Ripper? Why do we assume it was a man?
As his profile serial killer back in.
Because, well, we assume that even before we get to the serial killers, even though most men are not criminals, out of all criminals, most are men. So we make that assumption. But remember, you have to be careful of assumptions because assumptions can make an ass out of you and me. Correct. So we have to be careful about those assumptions. That's the importance of research and testing those hypotheses and research questions. So let me ask you, could Jack the Ripper actually be Jackie the Ripper? Sure. Sure, why not? In fact, do you remember the day that I told you that who's more successful at serial killing, men or women? Women. Why?
We don't suspect it.
We don't suspect it because we're all so sweet and innocent and can do no wrong and just sweet and perfect and couldn't kill a fly. I won't kill a fly. I'll kill a spider, kill a bunch of things, but not humans. But yeah, we make those assumptions. But and especially if you think about this was going on in 1888, not 2016. Even though we have those same assumptions today, in 1888 we especially assumed that it was a man. But it's never been solved to this day, and even the suspects that they propose are all men. And anybody pick Jack the Ripper for their YouTube assignment or their semester project? Nobody? Some of you still I know need to pick, so he or she is up for grabs. Did you pick him?
No.
No?
Have they ever, like, reopened the case?
Well, there's an author out there. What's her name? Patricia Cornwell, I believe. She has a book. It's called Jack the Ripper, Case Closed. Like she believes she's solved the case based on her journalism and research and things like that. I actually have the book. It's a decent read, but it's her perspective based on her research as a journalist and author. I will also tell you that I don't think, as far as I know, it's never been reopened or anything like that, just people's speculation in terms of who it is, and then people, like for example, so we talked about, remember Dorothy Puente's House Museum, and then I said, oh, there's a Jack the Ripper tour. Okay, did I tell you the story about Jack the Ripper? The Jack the Ripper tour? I didn't? Okay, well, it's just a side story with Jack the Ripper. If you have a really good guide, they're there to put you in the setting of 1888 in Whitechapel. And some of them will have really strong opinions on who they think. Like one year, they thought, the one guy adamantly thought that it was a royal member of the family who did it. He didn't give a crap about anybody of the other suspects. He said, this is who it is, and this is why this is who this is. But the point of me bringing up the Jack the Ripper tour is not necessarily because of that, but because one year a guy told us that somebody in the group was like, well, if they knew his name was Jack, how come they couldn't catch him? Nice. But hey, he clearly, maybe this is a trip he needs to be on, the tour. He needs to learn about Jack or Jackie the Ripper. I don't know. But yeah, so obviously that's a pretty funny story. So to answer your question, no, I don't think so. But if you chose him for your assignment, you could actually look through. Yeah, maybe you could open up a case or something like that.
Break the case after hundreds of years.
Well, it would be hundreds, just a little over 100. 1888. You figure out the math. Y'all know I'm not a mathematician. So anyway, so a profile of Jack the Ripper. Okay, so this is the first known and documented case of using profiling in the sense that we use profiles today. It's still not the exact same, but it's the first documented case of profiling. In the context that we think of it was actually done. Not in the context of William Sheldon or Cesar Lombroso or anything like that. But you see up there, you've got Dr. Thomas Bond and Dr. George Phillips. They were the first people to ever really examine a crime scene. And there's a phrase that I'm going to use that you need to have drilled into your head throughout the rest of the semester. And that is, behavior reflects personality. Behavior reflects personality. So do you remember the day we were talking about type A's versus type B, of what kind of crime scene a type A person might leave versus a type B, minus any kind of X factor or anything like that? That's the same thing, that your personality is likely to leave clues about who you are. It's basically working backwards. You're working a puzzle backwards. So you've got this crime scene. Crime scenes paint a picture. They not only paint a picture maybe about who the victim was and why they were targeted, but it also tells a story about the offender's
Relationship with the victim.
There's that, and the offender's personality. Exactly. And so that's one of the reasons why Jack the Ripper's case is so famous, is because it's the first documented one. He's also you see John, I don't think it says up there, but also the first documented case of a serial killer, even though we've already discussed in here that he or she is far from being the first serial killer, correct? Okay. And also, if you remember me talking about serial crime and the media and things like that, that this is when the press was becoming a thing. Literacy rates were going up, and those cheap tabloid papers were coming out, and so you've got this high-profile case and the incoming flux of the press that captures everyone's attention. So it's not only just that, but it's also the nature of the crimes, because what have you read about the Jack the Ripper murders?
It's gruesome.
Very gruesome. How gruesome?
Mutilated.
Mutilated.
Prostitutes.
The victims were all prostitutes, 4 or 5 of them, I believe. all prostitutes. Okay, so
That, and I read in the book that he wasn't like a skilled surgical person. so
yeah,
it's
that's the
like
thing, and that's
really
where Dr. Bond comes in, because everybody, oh, not everybody, a lot of people were saying, well, because of the skill, because some people, some women's, their uterus was, this is the plural of uterus, uteri, I guess. Uteri were removed, and just, there were knives shoved into women's vaginas. They were left in very sexually degrading positions, all of those sorts of things. But in the way that they were butchered, it was assumed or speculated by investigators that this person was very skilled, as like maybe they were a butcher, maybe they were a medical doctor, and things like that. But Dr. Bond actually comes in and examines the crime scene clues, and his predictions are he does not believe that the murder, this is the quote, he says, he was strongly opposed that to the idea that the murderer possessed any kind of scientific or anatomical knowledge, or even, quote, the technical knowledge of a butcher or horse slaughterer. Okay? So he didn't believe that he was skilled based off of all of this sort of stuff. So let's see up here, what have we got? Based on looking at the crime scene clues, determined some sort of personality traits of the killer from the victim, and was the first recorded serial killer because of the nature of the crime. Generally a typical sexual motive, but here's what Dr. Bond had to say about this. Dr. Bond said, the killer must have been a man of solitary habits, subject to, quote, periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania, which erotic mania means sexual in nature. Very good. Okay. With a character of the mutilations possibly indicating hypersexuality. And hypersexuality, this just means over-sexualized to a certain degree. Bond also stated, in quote, the homicidal impulse may have developed from a revengeful or brooding condition of the mind, okay, so some sort of mental illness, so to speak, or that religious mania may have been the original disease, but I do not think either hypothesis is likely. Now, when it says religious mania, what does that mean? What could religious mania refer to?
He thought what the women were doing was wrong and he wanted to punish them.
Exactly, because the women were, what was their profession?
prostitutes.
Prostitutes, and so he may have disagreed vehemently with their profession due to moral or religious beliefs.
Supposed to be sinful.
They're very sinful, they're completely disagreed with what they were doing, so forth and so on. But even though he stated all that, he didn't believe either of those to be possible. So, with that said, let's see. Kind of like I was saying, that even though they were left, some were left, their uterus was removed, knives shoved into their vagina, even with all that stuff, Dr. Bond did not believe that there was any kind of sexual motive, so to speak. And there was also no evidence of any sexual activity actually with any of the victims. Other people, not Dr. Bond, but other psychologists have supposed that the penetration of the victim with the knife and leaving them on display in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed indicates that the perpetrator derives sexual pleasure from the attack. So ultimately we don't have any answers, but the importance of this case is that Dr. Bond and his other Dr. Phillips up there were the first people to actually examine crime scene evidence and try to come up with a profile to try to predict. And again, what does profiling mean? To reduce the suspect pool. Okay? Does profiling solve crimes?
No.
No. Who does?
Investigators.
Investigators. And a profile is simply a tool used to assist investigators. Very good. So that's a little bit about Jack the Ripper. And just by the way, you can always change your YouTube assignment or your semester project up until the sign-up dates. Somebody in here might have picked them, they're going to just be absent today, but if you want to change your YouTube all the way up to September 22nd, you can do that. You can change your semester project all the way up to October 6th. So just FYI, in case this case intrigues you to a certain degree. Okay. Any questions on Jack the Ripper? Anybody thinking of changing? All right. So let's keep on moving. We are going to fast forward 1888 all the way up to the 1940s. And we're going to introduce you to a guy named George Metesky, also known as the Mad Bomber. Have any of you ever learned about the Mad Bomber in any of your other classes or own personal studies?
I've heard about it, but I really
Heard about it but don't really know about him? George Metesky's case is really classic to the field of profiling because this is really the first time not only profiles a profile in the sense that we actually know it today was used, and it was used successfully to capture the offender. So we've got George Metesky, which I don't know about you all. Can you see this picture of him? He looks like Alec Baldwin. Y'all see that? First of all, y'all even know who Alec Baldwin is?
Yeah, he does.
Okay, I think he does. If you don't know who Alec Baldwin is, just Google him. Not right now on your phones or anything, but just Google him later. But I think, and Alec Baldwin also, he's creepy looking in my opinion. I don't know about you all. But that one also looks really creepy to me. But that's who I see when I look at him, at least in that picture. This one, not so much. But so anyway, George Metesky, bring it to the 1940s. There were all kinds of bombings happening in New York. And investigators could not figure out who was setting off all of these different bombs. And mind you, these bombs were going off for over 16 years. So imagine living in New York and not knowing if a bomb is going to go off at any given time. Now, just so you know, none of the bombs ever killed anybody, so that's good news. But still,
for 16
years he terrorized New York. 16 years, that is a long time. Okay. Let's see, so he planted more than 30 small bombs over 16 years, but still, that's a long time, and at any random time, you just don't know. So you can imagine that instilled a lot of fear, not only into the community, but it put a lot of pressure onto who to solve the case?
Police.
The police. Okay, so they were getting desperate at this point to try to figure out who is this guy. And so investigators, essentially, they approached, what's his name, Dr. James Brussel, who was a psychiatrist, who was the New York State's Assistant Commissioner of Mental Hygiene. So they approached him to study the crime scene photos and the notes from the bomber, and we're eventually going to talk about the profile he came up with, and we're going to listen to an NPR segment, it's about 6 or 7 minutes long, on George Metesky and the investigation and the profile and its accuracy. Okay? But the police, what's his name? I can't remember the guy's first name, but Finney. Finney was one of the main investigators, actually approached Dr. Brussel and was desperate at that time. Can you help us? You're a psychiatrist. You're supposed to be able to help understand personalities and da-da-da-da-da. And one of the handouts that I'm going to give you in just a second is it's a good segment on the whole process of the George Metesky case. And at first, when he was approached by Finney, he said absolutely not, because you can imagine, think about how we even don't really understand mental health today. So think about it in the 1940s, people really didn't understand mental health. And so even though Finney was reaching out, all the other officers were like, we don't need a shrink to help us. What's he going to do? And so Dr. Brussel felt a lot of pressure and actually refused them a couple of times, and eventually, after Finney's asking him over and over and over, said, yes, I'll finally do it. And after looking through all the files, he came up with a pretty interesting profile. Let's see. So, in terms of, this is part of the profile. At this point, if you want to go ahead and pass out the articles on George Metesky, if you want to get one side, I'll get the other. So what I'm going to have you do is, once you get the handout, turn to page 3 and 4. It's not actually numbered 3 and 4, but the 3rd and 4th page. that talks about the profiler, and then read the next page called the profile. I'll have you read that. And then we're going to listen to the NPR segment. Yes, question?
You said that nobody died. Was that like on purpose? Like did he purposely make sure nobody died while he blew up?
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the things that's going to talk about in the NPR segment, and then also that you'll read about here, is that George Metesky actually purposefully designed the bombs so that they would not kill anybody. And then once you read about him and you understand him more, you'll understand he was never out to kill anybody. He was there to get attention to a certain cause. And he was basically tipped off at his job that had, I believe, let him go. Even though this is kind of long, you can read the rest on your own time, but just read pages 3 and 4 from right now. about them. Do y'all still need a few more minutes, or are you done? All right, so we're going to listen to this NPR segment, and then we'll talk about the profile.
Support for NPR and the following message come from StubHub, proud sponsor of Noteworthy, the NPR music series that profiles working musicians. StubHub wants to remind you that some of the greatest performers in the world will be pouring out their souls tonight. And you should be there. StubHub, your ticket out.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Robert Siegel. A couple of weeks ago, when Osama bin Laden was killed, I had a very brief flashback to a moment in my childhood when a man who terrorized my city was arrested. It was 1957, I wasn't quite 10 years old, so the threat seemed huge to me. It made all the papers, all the newscasts, even the newsreels.
A 16-year hunt for New York's Mad Bomber ends with the arrest and confession of George Metesky, a toolmaker who admitted hiding 31 homemade pipe bombs in public places since 1940. 21 of them exploded, injuring 15 persons in all. His motive was revenge against the Consolidated Edison Company for a 1931 plant accident he believed gave him tuberculosis.
The Mad Bomber turned out to be a fastidious man in his mid-50s with a garage full of bomb-making tools and an astonishingly inappropriate affect. In the photos of him, George Metesky, under arrest, grins inexplicably. The photos are in Michael Greenberg's new book, The Mad Bomber of New York, the extraordinary true story of the manhunt that paralyzed the city. Michael Greenberg joins us from Boston, a city that had a strangler but not a bomber. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
And let's start with the basic question. How did George Metesky manage to avoid arrest for 16 years?
It's a great question, and one that was asked by New Yorkers at the time. Metesky became very adept at melting into society and kind of cruising under the radar. One of his lawyers referred to him as someone who could pass as your next-door neighbor, and he just didn't stand out as the type of person that could be the Mad Bomber. He didn't look like the kind of person that people were looking for.
This was a huge newspaper story, and in those days, there were, I think, more local newspapers in New York City than there are national news networks today. Tell us about the role of the Hearst broadsheet, the Journal American.
You know, there was one very intrepid newsman by the name of Seymour Bergson, who was the publisher of the New York Journal American. And during the period of time when the bombings reached their crescendo, there was, panic, apprehension, a great deal of fear in the city. And Mr. Bergson got together with his staff and decided that the best way to approach this story would be to publish what he called an open letter to the bomber. And this letter promised good treatment to the bomber if he would reveal himself and turn himself in. Well, this had the effect of drawing out the bomber, so to speak, and he got into a very public dialogue with the newspaper and really created an ethical dilemma for Bergson, who was working very closely with the New York Police Department, who had asked him on several occasions to withhold information. So it was the journalist paradox, trying to balance his commitment to the community against his duty to zealously cover the news.
When it turned out that the details that Metesky had supplied to the Journal American about when his accident had occurred at Consolidated Edison, when that really led to his discovery, didn't hurt Journal American circulation, did it?
Yeah, absolutely not. And Seymour Bergson was criticized for setting up some type of a ploy. It was a publicity stunt to increase his circulation. And it did have the effect of increasing it, but he vehemently denied that this was somehow designed to increase circulation.
One innovation of the Mad Bomber case was, and you figure it was for the first time ever, the use of a psychiatrist to construct what we would now call a profile of the suspect. The psychiatrist was Dr. James Russell. What did he do?
Well, at the time, there was a tremendous amount of internal frustration within the police department and political pressure on the top brass of the department to make an arrest. And this would lead to the true significance of the case. A very progressive-minded captain of the force, Howard Finney, sought out Dr. Russell, really for the purpose of introducing a fresh set of eyes onto the evidence and to find out, hey, maybe the investigators missed something. What they got, as you said, was the first criminal profile in an active police investigation in the United States. Russell concluded that the Mad Bomber suffered from a case of progressive paranoia, and from that, he was able to create an inferential mosaic of probable characteristics. He called it his private blend of science, intuition, and hope.
If you read it favorably, his profile of the Mad Bomber said he would be a middle-aged man, he would be a Slav, he would be unmarried but probably living with women related to him, playing a maternal role. He would be wearing a double-breasted suit when he was arrested. So either he was very right or he was off by 10 years on the age. He had a Polish name, but he was really, I guess, Latvian, and he was wearing pajamas, not a double-breasted suit, but he typically wore double-breasted suits. So it was either a great profile or not quite right.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Russell was criticized to some extent, but by and large, the profile that he developed was widely accepted as accurate. And whether or not it had the effect of assisting in the investigation, which truly it probably did not, it had the effect of shining the light of awareness on this little used and little known crime-fighting tool. And others picked up on his technique. They didn't necessarily agree with it, but it evolved, and it became what it is today.
We should say that ultimately George Metesky lived out his days in a state mental hospital or in a hospital for the criminally insane. I don't know exactly what the title was. When he was arrested, he instantly admitted to all this.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about Metesky's later crusade, which became trying to prove his competency to stand trial, wasn't that he was so much interested in gaining his freedom, but he wanted his day in court to show the evils of Consolidated Edison Company. He wanted to bring that crusade to life in a courtroom, and he felt he needed a platform to do that, and he thought that a trial would be the best way to accomplish that.
Well, Michael Greenberg, thanks a lot for talking with us about the story and about your book.
Well, thanks for having me, Robert.
Michael Greenberg's book is called The Mad Bomber of New York, the extraordinary true story of the manhunt that paralyzed a city.
He looks like he's bugging a rug, don't he?
Oh yeah, sure does, doesn't he? So something to be said about the double-breasted suit. Even though he was found in pajamas, they did allow him to go get dressed. And when he got dressed, what did he come out wearing? A double-breasted suit. Pretty impressive, eh? So, you know, why this profile? How did he come up with this profile? What did he start with? He set off, what, 31 bombs and killed no one. So that probably shows some level of skill. You asked specifically, were they meant to kill or not? Well, these bombs don't kill. Either he's just a really crappy bomb maker, or he's so meticulous that he's simply trying to get people's attention and not really hurt anybody, right? So if someone is meticulous, in what other ways are they meticulous? Neatness, and that includes the way one dresses. And then, go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
The way they dress and the way they present themselves, the way they take their moves, just...
Exactly. And then in the handout that you read talked about how he had very neat, pretty handwriting. Definitely was educated to a certain degree based on the things he actually wrote. And that his one of his major downfalls was his writing, because dastardly deeds, do you remember reading that in the handout? That's a very unique phrase, is it not? Okay. Dastardly deeds. So in the investigation, whenever they're finally coming to this conclusion, it's somebody that's disgruntled with Con Ed. Well, the assistant, or one of the many assistants that worked at Con Edison, went and looked at all the disgruntled employee files. And in those disgruntled employee files, they came across, there's one from George Metesky, and what phrase do you think appears? Dastardly deeds. So, you know, thanks to the profile, and also really was the idea of bringing this to the this story to the public is what drew him out. Okay, why would that draw him out?
That's what he wanted.
That's what he wanted. He wanted attention. Okay, he was pissed off at the company, Con Edison. He believed that he had been wronged to some degree. Okay, so of course you heard you probably read there and heard there that the police were very apprehensive about that, but it ended up working. Did so very well.
How did they end up finding him?
How did they end up finding him? The dastardly deeds thing.
Okay.
Yep, that's what essentially drew him. Yeah, he did come out and says once they profile, reduce the suspect pool, said it's probably a disgruntled employee at such and such place. That's when they went and looked at the disgruntled employee files, matched the two, and then when they came to him, he immediately confessed because he wanted the attention. Okay, it was all about it at the court and everything, and so he was pretty correct. Let's see. So I don't know why it's doing that. There it goes. So yeah, said he would be unmarried, foreign, self-educated, in his 50s. So he said the profile that I have that you read in there said he would be a Slav, even though he was not. He was still from Eastern Europe, okay, Eastern European descent. And here's the thing about age. It says he would be in his 50s. Well, what did you read about in your article? Why were they able to guess he was in his 50s?
Because paranoia starts at 35.
It peaks around 35, and how long had the bombings been going on?
16
16 years. So you learn to deduce and deduce conclusions from previous known knowledge. Okay. Let's say living in Connecticut, which he got correct. Paranoid, because we talked about that just now, and with a vendetta against Con Edison, which he predicted because that was the first bomb and targeted the power companies. So that's where the first one went off. So there you go. So here's the thing about the George Metesky case. It's most important is that really Dr. Brussels' work in this case really opened up the window for psychiatrists and psychologists to use these profiles as a tool to help investigators solve crimes. So I don't know if we should thank George Metesky or if we should thank Dr. Brussels or both of them. But I'm sure we would rather not have had all those bombings and scares and things like that. But this is the story of where we get to today. That's our history. And so this then leads us to what is profiling, which you already know is profiling is defined as
The psychological approach to reducing the suspect.
very good. The psychological approach to reducing the suspect pool. Very good. That's essentially what Dr. Russell did. His profile led to all of that.
And he spent the rest of his time in a mental institution, correct?
Well, here's the thing. In the handout that I gave you, I encourage you to read the rest of it because you'll notice at the very end, it talks about kind of the end of his life. He actually lived to be, I think, 90. But yeah, the very last page, the aftermath. He lived to be 90. He didn't die until 1994, but he spent his time in the Madawian Asylum for the Criminally Insane, but he was actually released in 1973. And after that, he took up residence elsewhere. And it's very interesting that his case was so high profile and significant, but when he died, it didn't even make the papers.
I was just going to say that, all the attention, it didn't make the papers.
Yeah. But here we are talking about him now, and it even says on that last page that Dr. Russell even went to talk to him and visit him a couple of times, and then even asked George Metesky, do you believe that you're insane or crazy? And he said, no. No. They always say, oh, go ahead.
I was just curiosity.
Sure.
If he was mad at Con Edison and the first woman, where did the other 30 go off back then?
Random businesses, and I can't really tell you based off of the stuff in here why those were targeted.
I mean, you would think, I mean, if it's a power company, they have more than just one bid for them.
I can't remember if in here, if it says where else he targeted.
Maybe with businesses that use Con Edison?
Perhaps. Let's see here. Yeah, because, oh, yeah, a theater. And one of the places.
I mean, that would just be something that would throw off the profile, I mean.
And that could also bring you back to that meticulous thinking, because the idea with the serial offender is that they're going to get better and better with their crimes, and they're going to do things that are going to try to throw off the police, things like that. But for Dr. Russell, he focused on where the first one went off. And again, he was deducing that knowledge from probably his years' experience as a psychiatrist. But this was his first go at it. So he did it. You think he did a pretty good job his first go? It's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. And that's the thing, is that when you learn more about criminal investigative analysts, is that they have had years and years and years and years and years of training and formal education in fields of criminology, psychology, sociology, all of the above. Sexual deviance, I mean, all kinds of things, whether it's formal education in the sense of, going on the way to get a PhD, or having formal training in the sense of you're working for the FBI or any kind of law enforcement, and they send you to these trainings and things like that. But, yeah. Well, I can't remember what else I was going to say about it, but it doesn't matter. So, no, that's fine. I prefer you going first before me, so. Anything else about the Metesky case before we move forward? Flash forward to where we are today. All right, so how are we doing on time? Good. 1:05. All right, so today the FBI has something known as the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, also known as the NCABC. And criminal profiling, as I have told you before, in the FBI is known as criminal investigative analysis. And so someone that does this kind of work is a criminal investigative analyst. And so this department is a specialist department in the FBI, and their role is to coordinate investigative and operational support functions, criminological research, and training in order to provide assistance, notice that word assistance, to other federal agencies, state agencies, local agencies, and even for foreign law enforcement agencies investigating unusual or repetitive violent crimes. I know, Heather, you were in Sacramento with us when we heard from Dr. Hickey, and he talked, even though he doesn't work for the FBI or anything, he still does consulting on other cases, and he talked about some of the was it Japan or Korea? I don't remember which.
It was, I want to say Japan, I'm not.
I think it was Japan. I'll have to go back and watch that video again, but he consulted on a serial, was it a serial offender case, or I can't remember what the case was.
It was, the American student was there studying abroad, and she was murdered by her roommate.
That's right, so he was there to try to help out that. So even individual people who have extensive training in this area, but really the bottom line of what you need to understand is the people that work underneath this category are there to assist. Assist, assist, assist. They do not take over the case like you see on TV. It's also not just repetitive violent crimes that they focus on, because you'll notice, I think it's on the next slide or one of the ones, that there's different units underneath the NCABC. Okay, so they're also there to study threats, terrorism, cybercrime, white-collar crime, public corruption, and all kinds of other matters. And all of this stuff comes actually directly from FBI.gov. Okay. What's on the next slide? We'll go back just a second. So just a brief history of the founding of the NCABC, because ultimately this unit that we're talking about, when it started in, I think, the early 1970s, it was known as the Behavioral Science Unit. Oh, I almost wrote 1790s, that's not right. 1970s. if you'll notice the abbreviations, BSU, they even got made fun of saying, oh, their work is BS. They took a lot of heat for this kind of work because a lot of local and state law enforcement agencies didn't take this stuff very seriously. So they're kooky, we don't need your mind reading skills, even though that's totally not what it is. And so they called it BS. And so after a while, they eventually changed it to the Behavioral Analysis Unit, which is what you probably saw on the Criminal Minds episode that you watched. Now, does anybody watch the recent episodes of Criminal Minds? Have they changed the name from BAU to what it actually is? Do you know? Because usually they type it out like BAU headquarters, but because it's not the BAU perhaps anymore. So that's what it started off as. So when it goes from this to in the 1980s, the NCABC, which is broken up into several different categories. Okay, and so the NCABC was actually conceived in 1981 by then FBI agent and offender profiler Robert Ressler. And you'll learn when we get to the serial killer section, Robert Ressler is actually the one that's given credit for coining the term serial killer, even though there's actually evidence that somebody else came up with that. But we'll talk about that another time. Okay.
Plagiarism.
Yeah, exactly. That bastard. Okay, so and if you look on your syllabus under the optional reads, Robert Ressler is the author of one of the books is called I Have Lived in the Monster, which is basically a saying of, I have put myself in the minds of these monsters for years and years and years, and this is what I went through, these were my experiences. It's a fairly good read if you're interested in that kind of thing. One of the other, if you were, like I told you, I'm rereading Mindhunter right now. One of the other major profilers of the time, or criminal investigative analyst, his name was Jim McKinsey, who Robert Ressler worked with, and John Douglas. Okay, so McKinsey and Ressler worked together, they had this kind of conversation. And by the way, Jim McKinsey was the Quantico director at that point, and they kind of ran with the idea, and they eventually had it realized. They met sometime the next year with many different people at a conference, and ultimately decided that yes, we should have this NCABC unit, and it should be, the headquarters should be at Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI headquarters are. Okay, and so under the NCABC, you've got several BAU units. You'll see here. This has gone through a multitude of changes over the years. Okay, this is how it's structured right now. We're going to listen to an FBI podcast here in just a little bit, and you'll notice that there's a difference in the units that he's talking about. But this podcast is from 2011. This is from today. Does that make sense? So even the units that he's going to call it a BAU some other number, and it's not going to match up with what's here. Just realize that the categories have changed since this podcast. Okay, so
the 1 through 5 is like
that's what it is now. Yes, and that's the way it's been. I've been teaching this class since 2013, and that's the way it's been structured pretty much ever since. Okay, and it could undergo other changes. So they got rid of the BSU, and then they renamed it the Behavioral Analysis Unit. But now it's broken up into 5 different subsets. So you've got people who are highly specialized in each of these units. So you've got the BAU-1, focuses on counterterrorism, arson, bombing. BAU-2, threat, cyber, white-collar crime, public corruption. BAU-3, crimes against children. BAU-4, crimes against adults. Okay, and this is really what you would be. This is really, if you were to put it together with something on TV, this is what you're looking at. It's BAU-4. However, you see in Criminal Minds they do all of the work, which is not realistic. That's not the way real life is. So this down here is what I told you. It's been renamed the BRIU. And forgive me if I said institutional. It's supposed to be instructional. So Behavioral Research and Instructional Unit, which is formerly known as the BSU. Okay? And if you want, you can go to this site and look more up. And this is really, if you are genuinely interested in getting involved, not only in law enforcement, but especially at the federal level, and if you are majoring in criminal justice, you would apply as a diversified special agent. Okay? It's very difficult to get in. Okay? Because normally they're looking for people who are bilingual, they're looking for people who have computer science degrees, law degrees, some other sorts of things. But if you have a degree in criminal justice, experience in law enforcement, experience in military, you could go in under the diversified special agent and get involved in these sorts of things. Okay? So officially, this unit, the NCABC, was formally established in June of 1984 by then President Ronald Reagan. So this is a super official kind of thing. Okay? So we're going to listen to the FBI podcast. I think it's about 10 minutes. And it is by, I can't remember what his name is, but yes, did you have a question?
What did you say about Ronald Reagan?
He's the one that made this sort of thing official. Let's see, I'll read it to you. President Ronald Reagan formally announced the establishment of the NCABC in June of 1984. So this is something that, you know, wasn't just a light idea. It said, oh, we'll come up with this. There were a lot of steps and processes that needed to have gone through for this special unit to be established, and then over time to have 5 different specialized units. Okay, so this podcast is from a criminal investigative analyst in the FBI, and he's going to talk to you about the realities of what it's like working in the FBI versus what you see on TV. So it's a pretty good listen. Gotta set the mood, right?
Making sense of the incomprehensible. That's the specialty of the 8 agents of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit 2, or BAU2. They get inside the twisted minds of serial murderers like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and John Allen Muhammad. The very names of these notorious killers incite fear and fascination, and their horrific acts attract the attention of the public, the media, and mental health experts.
The type of cases we get involved in, the serial murder cases, the unusual, the bizarre cases, are the type of cases that most people, the average individual, struggles to understand themselves. Why would somebody kill 10 different people over a year's time period? What kind of person would chop somebody up or would carve something into a victim or would do some other bondage or other type of activity? So it's something that as a normal human beings we struggle with. We don't understand.
I'm Molly Halpern of the Bureau, and you're listening to Inside the FBI. Coming up, get an inside look at the work of the agents Hollywood calls profilers, what it takes to become an agent in the BAU, and how they're using their expertise in new ways. But first, how the BAU evolved. Back in 1985, the FBI established the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime in the Bureau's Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy. Its continuing mission? To consolidate investigative and operational support with research and training in order to provide assistance to local law enforcement. Supervisory Special Agent and BAU2 Unit Chief, Mark Hiltz.
Was looking at those types of cases that a police investigator doesn't see every day. A child abduction, a serial murder, a serial rape case. The behavioral expertise of the agents became known as FBI profilers, and they were looking at crime from the behavioral aspect. What I mean by that is they're focusing on the motivations of the offenders. What's the meaning behind the activities at a crime scene? Why was a particular person victimized? Were they specifically targeted by this individual, or were they simply a victim of opportunity in the wrong place at the wrong time?
The Violent Criminal Apprehension Program database, or VICAP, was established in tandem with the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. It helps connect the dots in cases involving solved and unsolved murders, sexual assaults, kidnappings, missing persons, and unidentified dead bodies.
The idea being that if murder is committed in California and a murder is committed by the same offender in Florida, and there's very similar behaviors at the crime scene, how are those two detectives going to know about each other? How are they going to know that that other case exists? So the idea is, if both those homicides are put into this database, then the crime analyst personnel in VICAP would helpfully match that and would tell those detectives and say, you guys need to talk to each other and compare evidence.
As the FBI's mission evolved, so did the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. These days, BAU is in the process of becoming 4 units, each with specific responsibilities. BAU-2 will continue to focus on providing support to local law enforcement when they're confronted with unusual violent crimes like serial murder, but will also apply their expertise to nonviolent crimes.
Right now, this year particularly, we're actually shifting our focus to more of an enhanced focus on those FBI cases with an emphasis on public corruption and white-collar crime.
Whether it's white-collar crimes or serial murder, fellow federal investigators and local law enforcement turn to BAU-2 because of the perspectives the agents bring to cases. It's what makes the BAU so successful.
The perspective that we look at in the behavioral analysis units is the behavior, it's the motivation, it's the why part of a criminal investigation that we're looking at. And because the type of cases we're looking at are generally a little bit more unusual, which is why somebody comes to us, that's what we have to develop our expertise in, is understanding those unusual cases, studying those serial killers, looking at hundreds of cases of serial killers and in some cases talking to them. We've done research and interviewed serial killers to understand why they do what they do so that we can help determine how we can catch them. That's really the perspective that we bring is that behavioral side of the investigation.
The BAU agents also bring their investigative case experience, education, and specialized training.
Because we're seeing cases from all over the country and literally all around the world, we've had the opportunity to see that type of activity multiple times. We have the opportunity to see case after case that are unusual. We have the opportunity to see a dozen serial murder cases in a year, whereas your average police investigator may have one serial murder case in his career.
Before an agent even enters the BAU, they've already had between 7 to 10 years experience as an FBI agent.
About half the agents in my squad are former police officers. So in addition to our FBI experience, we have state or local law enforcement investigative experience, and that's what we find is extremely beneficial to our work here is having the practical investigative, hands-on investigative experience as FBI agents and or as state and local police officers in conducting the investigation.
Hill began his law enforcement career as a police officer in Texas.
After several years of experience there, got the itch to try my lot in the FBI. I consider the FBI to be the best law enforcement agency in the world. And I wanted to see could I be one of the best. And so that led me to the FBI.
Even with experience in local law enforcement and the FBI, BAU agents must still go through additional training, which can last up to 2 years.
It's a 2-part training process. Phase 1 is a classroom. It's about 16 weeks long of classroom instruction from both internal and outside experts. When someone has completed that, then they go into phase 2, which is kind of a period of mentorship, and they work cases in all 3 different BAUs so that they can get a broad range of experience and all the unit's responsibilities.
A crime analyst and a major case specialist are also part of the unit, and the BAU works closely with the FBI lab. The unit reaches outside of the Bureau for expertise as well. For example, BAU works with forensic psychologists and psychiatrists from Walter Reed Army Medical Center.
We have an outside board of scientific and academic experts that work with us to ensure that our research is valid and is scientifically and academically accepted. We can also review and assemble the research that others have conducted on that particular crime topic. We can then be in a position to have as much information about that type of crime as possible.
The BAU provides at least a dozen services to local law enforcement, and each one is tailored to the individual case. They collaborate on cases with the locals, unlike the way VAU is portrayed on popular shows like CBS's Criminal Minds.
We're going to come out, we're going to meet with them, we're going to talk with them, we're going to provide them our assistance, but we do not take over the case. The case remains their case. It's not a matter of defense are here, we're in charge. It doesn't work like that at all. We're there at their request and at their assistance, and they're going to be the ones that actually solve the case. They're the ones that are the true heroes and the true people in the front line. We're kind of once removed from the cases. We're not dealing with the frontline detectives have to deal with, so we're kind of removed. And we kind of look at the cases clinically as much as we can and try not to get emotionally involved, which I suppose may sound somewhat cold, but if we get emotionally involved with every single case we work, then we frankly wouldn't be very effective.
VAU agents will review case materials like crime scene photos and reports, which the local law enforcement already prepared.
We'll read through it, and again, that's the part that you don't see in movies and TVs, the hours and hours that our agents spend just simply sitting at their desk reading offense reports. We always try to get multiple people involved. We don't do, one agent, one case. There will be a case agent assigned, but he'll be supported by other agents and other members of our unit and or outside experts as needed. In reviewing the case,
the VAU then presents local law enforcement a report of its conclusions, assessments, and advice.
And frankly, they can take it or leave it.
And when they take it and it helps solve a case, Hilt says his work is especially rewarding.
I just really have found myself fascinated by the opportunity to study, understand, and provide assistance in what are really the most interesting cases that come to the attention of law enforcement. Personally, it's very rewarding to work these type of cases, to be involved in these type of cases, and to be involved even sometimes to just a small degree in the resolution of a significant serial murder or other bizarre case. It keeps you going on the next cases, because the cases we do see are also really the most horrible cases, and the activities that we see are oftentimes very brutal, and they can be tough from time to time to deal with that. But for the most part, myself and the other agents that are here recognize that that's part of the price of solving the cases.
The Behavioral Analysis Units, providing perspectives to the most disturbing of cases. Thanks for listening to Inside the FBI.
All right, so hopefully that gives you or gave you a better idea of what actually goes on in the NCABC. And so you notice you heard them say BAU2 over and over and over again, but that's not how it is anymore. What they're talking about, what used to be the BAU2 would now be the BAU4, and then sort of the BRIU, which is the research and instructional unit, where they're conducting the research, going back and forth, making sure things are valid, doing the teaching, the instruction, which think about it, instructional unit, those sorts of things. So, how many of you think you might want to go into the FBI? Anybody? Got one?
I thought about it.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
You don't know yet? Anybody else? Got one? Okay. Even maybe not the FBI. Is anybody interested in law enforcement? Maybe at the local level? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What about, I'm going to say local. What about state? Do you want to do state or local? Doesn't matter. Whoever hires you, right? Who's ever going to pay your bills? I've even still thought about the FBI was my dream job going in when I was sitting in your seat. So I still think about, because that's everything to think about. I know y'all are youngins, but the age cutoff is 37. But to apply and be accepted into, like you're not retired by 37, although that would be nice, right? No, so anyway, so that's a little bit about that. Are there any questions or comments from the podcast?
How do they stop themselves from being, I know they have training and everything, but how do they stop themselves from being
Personally involved and getting emotionally? That is an excellent question. We're actually going to spend more time on that in the next class, but I can go ahead and talk to you a little bit about right now. One, from my perspective, I can tell you that it's an art and a science. You can teach yourself how to do it, but also some people are just better naturally able to separate themselves from emotional stuff. For me, I feel like I'm pretty good at it. I get emotional at certain things. I know victimology or family violence, or if I read the Starfish story. You know, I do have emotions and I do have feelings just like the rest of you, but I don't know, there's just something it's the science part of me, the scientist part of me that's able to, it's called compartmentalization. Have y'all heard of that before, where you're able to, you've got your work life, you've got your home life, and you're kind of able to separate the two. And so I know sometimes when I'm talking about some pretty horrific things in victimology and family violence, I warn students that I might sound kind of cold-natured, but it's a coping mechanism. I have to separate myself because I read and study and teach this stuff all the time. So I can sort of imagine what it might be like to be up close and personal with this sort of stuff. So going back to what I said, it being an art and a science, I think some people are naturally able to do it, but also training. If you are trained as a scientist, you have trained your brain to see things in an objective manner as much as possible. Now, at the end of the day, can you completely 100% separate yourself from the stuff that you're seeing? No. And it will take a toll on you. And that's where your positive, healthy coping mechanisms come into play. So we'll talk about in next class what makes a good criminal investigative analyst. Before we start packing up, speaking of packing up, that's one thing I'm going to tell you, is one that's a pet peeve of mine, but we're going to make a deal today. We're going to make a deal that if you don't pack up early, I will give you review sheets for your exam. Okay? Sound good? All right, so I know that we are like right at, I got about a minute left, but here's the thing. Thursday, I will not be here for this class. Victimology, we're still having class victimology, but I have to leave around noon on Thursday. So what's going to happen, I know we did this last semester with criminology and my race and CJ and stuff. So what I was thinking is that because we can't get behind, we have a certain amount of material that we have got to get through. So I was thinking of doing, just like we did last semester, is having just one, not 3 for criminology, but one like makeup class. And I know specifically on Tuesday and Thursdays, no one has class at 3:05 to 4:20. They specifically designed that this semester. I believe it's Tuesday and Thursday. Is that that's the block of time, correct? But I know some people work. So if we set up a time to have a class next Tuesday from 3:05 to 4:20, how many of you think you might be able to make it? Okay, and so most of you. So and here's the thing: is even if you don't or are unable to make it, you know that I have that video camera for a reason, so it would be posted for you to watch. Normally I would have you just watch the lecture that I gave like last fall, but I like the interaction. It's just better in my opinion. So I'll find us a classroom. So Tuesday at 3:05. And again, I'll remind you on Tuesday. I'll send out an email. If you have classmates that you know aren't here today, pass the message along. So does everybody understand? Question?
So we'll have like our normal class time?
We'll have our normal class this Tuesday. No class this Thursday.
Okay.
No class this Thursday. I won't be here. You can come, but there ain't going to be anybody here. You can teach yourself if you like. So I know you've got to go now. So if you have questions, you can say after. I was intending on letting you out early today, but it didn't work out. So no class Thursday. What is that date? September 1st.